Horizon family, I'm so pleased to have our friend Bo Stern with us today here at Horizon. She's a tremendous speaker. You've heard her several times. She's a pastor at Westside Church in Bend. That's a great church. She's an accomplished author of several books, including Beautiful Battlefields, and she's got a great blog that you're going to want to check out. She's influenced a lot of people here through her writing and speaking, but she's had a lasting impact at Horizon through camps as well. Her and her husband Steve started a winter camp out at Washington Family Ranch in Central Oregon over a decade ago. And our middle and high school students have gone there all these years, and their lives have been tremendously impacted for Jesus as they've grown to love him more and more. Thank you, Bo, for that. We love Bo, and I know you're going to be encouraged and challenged by her today. Will you give a warm welcome to our friend Bo Stern as she comes this morning?
Karen, for having me again. Hello, Sherwood and Lake Oswego. I'm glad you're here as well. Whenever in your intro they mention something that you did over a decade ago, you have to take a quick check on how old you have become at that point. I love the Bible, and I love that series you're doing. Oh, I love seeing you guys too. I love that series you're doing, this story. The Bible is, I've given my whole adult life to studying it. I managed to wrangle myself a career, somebody who would pay me to do it, and I love it. And the Bible really is not a book, it's a library. It's 66 stories. And all the stories have a plot line, and they have characters, and they have things going on. And they have tension, and victories, and heroes, and villains. But really, the Bible as a whole has this overarching theme and one main character, and the one main character is God, and the reason we know that is because he's the only one who doesn't die. So that's cool. So God's overarching purpose runs throughout the 66 books, and in them we see his character, we see his ways, and we see his strategy for mankind. And his strategy really can be told in 3 words. The story of God can be told in 3 words: create, restore, redeem. Any page in the Bible you look at and you point your finger, you can see how God is creating something, and then as the creation we tend to mess it up. Yeah, anyone messed up something God has tried to do in your life? And then he restores what we mess up, which makes him the God of second and 22nd and 200 million chances. And then ultimately, the Bible is about the redemption of our whole lives through his son, Jesus Christ, his blood on the cross. Palm Sunday. Happy Palm Sunday. And so the create, he does it. Restore, he does it in this life. And redemption, he does it ultimately for eternity, which is really cool. And why we can sing songs like, you know, the power of hell forever broken, because of the redemption of Jesus. So we see this plot line running throughout the Bible. And for my money, when I see people who are successful in life, it usually boils down to one primary thing, and it's that they have been able to find their place in the story. Because the story is all about Jesus. We're always saying that at Westside and Bend. The story's all about Jesus. All the stories go back to Jesus. And it's really true, except the stories are a little bit about us. I mean, like, we like to say that cute thing at Christmas and put it on Christmas cards. Jesus is the reason for the season. And it's rhymes, so it must be good theology. You know, I'm a fan of rhyming theology always. But really, Christmas was a rescue mission. Easter was a rescue mission. Jesus came because I needed him so desperately. We are the damsel in distress. And we're the reason he came. And so really a better way to say it, even though it's not quite as poetic, is humanity's propensity to always and endlessly screw things up is the reason for the season. You know, it's because we're hopelessly broken. And so we have to find our place in this story, and he invites us into it. So my church has been looking at the book of Jeremiah, which I'm telling you is no picnic. It is not that cool of a book. It's really discouraging. It was my series to plan, and so I was in it for about 3 months, buried in commentaries and stuff, and finally I told my pastor, I need out of Jeremiah. It's such bad news. But I've grown to love this book. I mostly love it because when you finish it, you're like, okay, it's uphill from here. All the other books are more happy. What happens in Jeremiah is God calls to Jeremiah, and he asks him to be a prophet to the nation of Judah. Judah has been walking away from God's plan for centuries at this point. So, you know, the children of Israel were always sort of in and out of the favor of God, in and out of the plan of God for their lives. They would touch base with covenant, and then they would step out of it. And so God comes to Jeremiah as the last prophetic voice to the nation of Judah, and he says, you need to tell them their time's up. No more chances. They need to change, or else it's going to go badly for them. And so, Jeremiah does end up being the last prophet until Babylon takes them over, and then they really are in captivity from that time forward forever, to Babylon and to Persia and to the Greeks and then to the Roman Empire when Jesus comes on the stage. So he comes to Jeremiah and he asks him to do something that's really, really hard. I mean, it's a thankless job. They don't want Jeremiah as a prophetic voice. They already have plenty of prophets telling them they're doing fine. And so Jeremiah knows this people. He knows who they are. He knows this isn't a cool job. But God comes to him in Jeremiah 1, and he says this amazing thing. It's this incredible invitation into his story. He says, Jeremiah 1:5, before I even formed you in your mother's womb, I knew all about you. Before you drew your first breath, I had already chosen you to be my prophet, to speak my word to the nations. Now, please catch this idea, because I believe that it's true of Jeremiah and it's true of all of us. The Bible, God's character never, ever changes, and the Bible is about God. So when we see how God interacts with humanity, we can say, okay, how do I see God interacting with me like that? So he says to Jeremiah, this little tiny verse, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Wait, what? I knew you before I made you? What was there to know? It would appear that there is something of the substance of Jeremiah that existed before Jeremiah. And from this scripture, what we see is that it's his purpose. That God first formed a prophet, and then he wraps it in skin and blood and flesh and bones. And Jeremiah breathes life into the person. If this is true, then that means our purpose, what God has always created us to be and do, is the truest thing about us. It's truer than our height and weight. Not that our weight is constantly true, right? I mean, let's be honest. It's truer than our hair color, also a thing not totally true with me all the time. It's truer than our sexuality. It's truer than our family of origin. It's truer than our gifts. It's truer than our failures. It's truer than our successes. Our purpose, our pre-existent purpose, is the truest, sturdiest thing about us. If you feel like you failed your way out of God's plan A for your life, I don't think it's true. And if it's not just here. If it were just here, I wouldn't preach it. I'm better at theology than that. We see it when David says in Psalm 139, all the days ordained for me were written in your book before even one of them came to be. Wait, there's a book about you? There's a book about your days before you live them? And I'm not suggesting that we are eternal. We are not. We are created beings. Neither am I suggesting that we are cherubim bouncing around in heaven, or angels, or spirit babies, or any of those things. I don't know what we are, but I do know God knows our purpose first. And then Paul says to the Romans, and we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his what? Purpose. That word purpose in the Greek is the word prothesis. It means a preset eternal plan. He has this preset plan for your life. It's already in place. And then in Ephesians, he says, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. For we are his workmanship. The Greek word poema, it's a word that means poem. Your life is like the words in a poem all coming together to form something beautiful. It's so cool. So we are his workmanship, created for good works that Christ prepared beforehand, that we would walk in them. We just have to walk in the works that he already prepared. His purpose is true over your life. And so I think for Jeremiah, the purpose that God calls him to is pretty dangerous and thankless and sort of impossible. And sometimes that's what the purpose of God looks like for us. Sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes it's not pleasant. Sometimes it's real hard. I've watched people leave on mission trips and thought, wow, I've got a cousin who serves in a Muslim nation and writes to me emails kind of in code. It's dangerous. And so far it's been pretty thankless. I mean, sometimes the mission of God is like that. Sometimes the mission of God is winsome and wonderful and exciting. Like you get to get in your car and go on a road trip to Portland and speak to the awesome people of Horizon. I'm like, this is my purpose. Let it be this forever. This is great purpose. Sometimes it's like that. And sometimes the purpose of God is boring and mundane. It's like the eat your broccoli of purpose. Sometimes it's like go to the same job that you've been going to on time for the 13th year. Sometimes it's stay married to the same person you promised your life to, even though it would be exciting to entertain other options. Sometimes the purpose of God is make yet another peanut butter sandwich. Change another diaper. Sometimes it's not very exciting, but it just is. It just has to be done. It's purpose for that day. So I spoke this message at my church a couple of weeks ago, and rarely have I received so much feedback on a message. Feedback is what we call it. It was good. It just, people weren't frustrated with me. They were frustrated with God, because they were saying it was one of two things. There was a group of people who wrote to me and said, I believe that my purpose is probably the truest thing about me, but I have no idea what it is. I've been searching and looking, and I cannot figure out where I fit in this plan. And then the other group was, I think I know what my purpose is, but I don't like it. I have a friend who wrote to me a one-line email, one sentence. What if I don't want to make peanut butter sandwiches anymore? I have another friend who knows that for now, this time in his life, he's single, and he knows he's called to abstinence. And he wrote to me and said, I know that's the purpose of God for my life, and I don't want to do it. And so what is my answer to that? When you don't know your purpose or you don't like your purpose, my answer is, I don't know what you should do. Sometimes we think preachers should have the answers, and I'm over it. I'm over having all the answers. I used to have all the answers, and now I know I don't. In fact, Jesus himself was asked 183 questions during his ministry. We see him recorded in the Gospels. You know how many he answered directly? 4. He answered directly. And what's your next question? Which 4? Because we like direct answers. 179 questions Jesus answered with questions or parables. Because I think Jesus knows that the information we discover on our own is the most powerful there is. So I'm going to answer the question of purpose with a story. I was raised by the most fantastic people I have ever known, still to this date. And they taught me one main thing, and the one main thing was God has a plan and you are a part of it. That's my best parenting tip. If you could just teach your kid that one thing, God has a plan and you are a part of it. And so I announced to them somewhere in high school years, I want to be a lawyer, and they did not want me to be a lawyer. That was not in their plan for me at all. And they said, well, we don't really think that's your purpose, but we're not in charge of your purpose. That's a God thing, so your fight is with God. And I was like, shoot, I think I could win them. I'm never going to win God. So I wrestled it out with God, and I said, I'll give you a year at Bible college, and then I'm going to go pursue this idea of being a lawyer. And I did one word study in the Greek, and I was ruined. I was ruined for everything else. I just loved it so much. And so I fell in love with the Word of God in Bible college, and then I fell in love with Steve Stern in Bible college, and never turned back from that idea either. We got married when we were way, way too young. We had started having kids pretty soon after. We bought a house in Gresham for $63,000. I know. I think it sold for that in 2009 as well. Now it's like back up on the up and to the right. And we were involved in ministry, and we worked hard. We were both like I'm raised by former Mennonites, and he's raised by Pentecostals, so we were rule followers. We really wanted to obey the rules and do it right, and we wanted to stay out of God's, danger zone. And so we try to do things right. We try to pay our tithe and pay our dues and show up on time and serve the church and serve people and raise good kids. And went into ministry at Westside and Bend. For me, it was 14 years ago. Steve was on staff for 8 years, and then he just missed business so badly. He missed being out in the world where people really needed Jesus. Not that they don't need him in the church, but he loved that. And so he took a job with a great, great company, but his territory was Orlando, Florida. And if you want to pin Orlando and Bend, Oregon on the map, it's difficult to get further and remain in the continental United States. So every other week, he flew to Florida and then was home every other week. And during that year, I watched him start to fade. He was not doing well physically or emotionally or spiritually. He was just not doing well. And I started to be really worried about him. And then he came home one day and he said, my golf swing is like 40 yards short. And my husband knew his health by his golf swing. He could tell. And so he went to a doctor, and the doctor prescribed a steroid injection for his shoulder and said, we'll get you all better. And it worked for about 2 weeks, and then things were back to the way they were. And then a little later, he came to me and said, I can't even do one push-up. I don't know what's going on, but I don't have any strength. And I was like, okay, this is not okay. And so we went to a neurologist, and that was in 2011, and I was there. We didn't get any answers that day, but I just knew this is real bad. We're in for the fight of our lives for sure. And so a couple of weeks later, the neurologist called us back in, and he said, we've excluded just about everything except ALS and a brain tumor. And I don't know if you've ever been in a place in your life where you prayed, please let it be a brain tumor. But that was where we were at that point. ALS is a neuromuscular disease that shuts down your body slowly. It takes 2 to 5 years until eventually only your eyes and brain function. And then your breathing gives out. It's a real bad way to die. And so we were just hoping not that. But then we finally got the final diagnosis that it was ALS. And my husband, it wasn't ever in our purpose statement, We had been to 100 little seminars where you write your life goals and your core values and your mission statement, and never was our mission statement, we really want to matter to a terminally ill community, never. But Steve quickly wrapped his brain around that. He quickly understood we just got our ticket into a community that could never hear from us otherwise. So beautiful things have happened because of ALS. I mean, seriously, no hyperbole, beautiful things. There were times when men would just come to our house to sit with Steve and tell him about their broken marriage or their broken job or their broken dreams. And Steve was just so available to hear and care and pray, and he prayed for hours for the men in his life. And then times where we took a bunch of trips right up front and where we got to stand on the steps of the Colosseum in Rome. And I remember saying, can you believe we get to be us right now? And then, times when we got to be a voice to this community that's dying. I had a dream one night, and I told Steve about it the next morning. I said, I had a dream, and I felt like Joseph. I had a dream that the whole country was talking about ALS. The whole country, and nobody knows about ALS. It's just this little hidden one. It's like 5,000 people a year get it. It's pretty rare. And so I said, I think maybe a celebrity will get it, and that makes everyone start to talk about it. And 2 weeks later, the Ice Bucket Challenge came around. And in a minute, everybody was talking about ALS. I wrote a blog post during that Ice Bucket Challenge about the Ice Bucket Challenge, and it went viral and was read by 15 million people just on my blog. It went to every country. I was featured on CNN and USA Today and HuffPost and NBC News. I was a voice for that community. And I'm grateful. But I never dreamed. I never dreamed. When you're in Bible college, everybody wants to be a speaker or a prophet, to have a voice. And God answered my prayer. Just not at all like I thought. Just wasn't the purpose that I thought. And so there were some beautiful, beautiful things in the midst of ALS. And then there were some things that I just wouldn't want to go through again. There was a day early on when Steve fell in our garage, and he didn't have the ALS robs your ability to speak and swallow. And so he was still speaking, but he couldn't get volume out. So he laid on the garage floor for 20 minutes until I found him. And I never have felt like such a failure. And then there was the time when he sent his golf clubs to a missionary in Uganda because he knew he couldn't ever use them again. There was a moment when he gathered my family. In fact, it was 2 years ago today, gathered my family around and told us goodbye because he was having feeding tube surgery the next day, and they didn't know if he'd come through it. He lived 15 months after that. There was a moment in July of this year when his hospice nurse said his ear, he had a bed sore on his ear, pressure sore, and we had done everything to try to get a hold of that thing, to try to fix it for him. And she said, his ear is turning black. His ear is dying. His body, his spirit is outliving his body. And then on July 17th, our pastor came over to pray with Steve, as he did all the time. And he said to my husband, "Who's waiting, Steve? Is heaven waiting, or are you waiting?" Because it was just so clear. In fact, in the 2 weeks leading up to that, Steve had been sort of in and out. He had like 1 foot in heaven and 1 foot in Bend. Sometimes coherent and sometimes not very. And so it doesn't matter. I just keep telling him about my day anyway. You just can't stop me from telling all processing, talking about elections, all those things. He's such a good listener. And so my pastor said, "Who's waiting?" And my husband said, "Well, Josiah, who's our son." We have 4 kids. Josiah is our youngest and our only begotten son. And he said, "Josiah had a driver's ed test yesterday. And it'd be hard for him to focus if I died. And Tessie, our 3rd daughter, is in Seattle, and it's not kind to leave while your children are away. I'm waiting." Because he is a purpose wrapped in a person. And the person was dying all around him, but his purpose was alive and well. It was stronger than ever. People talk to me about why didn't God heal him, and I always say God did. If you could have seen inside of Steve, you would have seen all the healing that took place in his spirit and his soul as his body was no longer an option to rely on. And so after our pastor left, Steve had this moment of just total clarity. He was almost euphoric. And he asked my brother-in-law to take him outside, and he hadn't been outside in maybe months. And so Joe took him outside. He came back in, and I said, "How you doing, hon?" And he looked at me, and he said, "Bo, I am happy in every way." Can you just think about it? I mean, this isn't a good death. His ear is dying. He cannot do one single thing for himself. We were in charge of keeping Steve alive 24 hours a day. And he looks at me and says, "I am happy in every way. Only Jesus. Only purpose." I know that people can get through terminal illness with positive thoughts. I know there are people who do it better than others. There are people who probably do it better than some Christians with just a good attitude and a can-do spirit. But I am telling you, the only way to be happy in every way on the eve of your own death is to know the purpose of God for your life. Because what I believe is that Steve was looking back on his timeline saying, "I have done what I came here to do. I've started all these things spinning on planet Earth, and they will outlive me, and I will go eat a good meal." So the next day, surrounded by our family and beautiful worship, he flew away home. And I thought I was so ready. I've been waiting for 5 years really, and And it was a hard life taking care of him. And it spun me into this place I've never been, where I was so asking myself the question, and maybe you're asking yourself the question this morning, who am I now? Now who am I? I remember writing something in my journal that said, I think most of my life is trying to figure out what to do with what remains when plan A falls apart. How do you build a plan B? I didn't think I'd be a widow at 49. I didn't think I'd be a single mom. Everything got cast in this entirely different light, and I felt like I was walking through an alleyway where I had never been, and it wasn't eminently dangerous, but it wasn't anything I had ever known, so I just wanted to go home. I just wanted to go back to what I had known, back to being married, back to believing nothing bad could happen to us because we had done everything right. I just wanted to go back to all of that. So, much to my kids' dismay, I have never read The Hobbit. They are just total nerds that way. They love The Hobbit and all things Tolkien, and I had just never read it, and I had never watched the movies. And they tried to convince me, your sermons will be so much better if you read it. I was like, sorry. So for whatever reason, my son and I decided we took a road trip here in Thanksgiving for a family event. And I said, you know what, let's get The Hobbit on Audible, and let's listen to it as we go over the mountain. And The Hobbit, by the way, is very cool, driving over a snowy mountain pass. It's just very cool. And so that's what we did. And I'm listening to it, and I'm getting so frustrated. Because Bilbo Baggins, you guys, all he wants is to have some tea and read a book and eat some cake in his little hobbit house. That's all he wants. That's really all I want in this life. I just want to have some peace and safety in my life. It's what I wanted then more than ever. But poor Bilbo gets swept away into this adventure he has no choice in. And all of a sudden he's fighting with trolls and having all kinds of terrible things happen to him. And I looked at Josiah and I said, does this ever get better? Do we ever get Bilbo back to his hobbit hole? Because if that's not going to happen, I need to check out right now. And so as we were listening, I heard this line, and it was so stirring. It has become one of the mottos of my life. Frodo, right? Is it Frodo? He says to Bilbo, there are no safe paths in this part of the world. You're over the edge of the wild now, and in for all sorts of fun wherever you go. And I thought, I'm over the edge of the wild. I didn't mean to come here, but I'm here now. And if my purpose is, as Paul said, to know him and the power of his resurrection, then this is not plan B. This is just part 2 of plan A. I'm just living out part 2. Plan A still stands. I still know him and the power of his resurrection. My purpose is not necessarily connected to my title. My purpose stands. And I'm so grateful. And sometimes we look at purpose as what we will be called 15 years from now, when we get an education, when we get the job we want, when we get the spouse we want, when we become a parent. We look at that as purpose. But purpose is lived out every day in the edge of the wild. Every single day. Every morning I get up and I write 3 ways that I am going to live in purpose today. Today. I did it this morning in my hotel room. I'll do it tomorrow from a waiting room at OHSU where my brother-in-law is having open heart surgery. I'll do it the next day wherever I end up. I did it in November when I landed at a ladies' conference. The only other thing I said yes to speaking at in 2015, I spoke at a big ladies' conference in Denver that was put on by a radio station. And I got up and I just said, God, I want to live on purpose. And I'd read this article about young women in Afghanistan who had been rescued from sex slavery and were being educated, and it was beautiful. And I wrote something down about that. How could I help? I don't know. So I go to this conference, and I'm a little annoyed by it, frankly. Men, you don't understand what women's conferences are like. They're noisy, is all I'm saying, and I haven't been in a noisy mood. And so I'm sitting there, and the organizer gets up, and he introduces some VIPs, some people who had come to the conference. They had flown them in just to attend the conference. He introduces a woman last, whose name is Jasmine. She is in Afghanistan, living in Afghanistan, and her job is teach rescued women to read. And I sat there astounded at God's ways. And she came to me afterwards to tell me how much she loved what I said, which is the most humbling thing that's ever happened to me. She said, "You've suffered so much." Oh my gosh. And I said, I can't believe I got to meet you. I can't believe that you're here right now, and I am so impressed with what you're doing. And she looked at me, and she took my face in her hands, and she said, will you come? And my answer is, I don't know, but I will say yes to Jesus. I don't know what's next. I just know my purpose stands. I know it. And I know your purpose stands, no matter what, no matter how far you feel from it, no matter how much you don't like it. Here's one thing. God asks us to do difficult things. All through the story of God, he's asking people to do really, really hard things and never once apologizes for it. Apparently, he knows hard things aren't bad, they're just hard. And so, no matter how far you feel from it, no matter how much you don't feel like you quite know it, can I just encourage you today? What is your purpose today? If you string together enough days living on purpose, you'll run right into the pre-existent purpose of God for your life. And it doesn't have as much to do with titles and roles as we think. It has to do with saying yes to every minute, inviting him into every minute. He has been so faithful to us through this whole journey. He has never budged an inch. We've budged. He has never budged. We have felt him in every minute. Don't fear hard times. He will be with you in every minute. He will be with you in ways you never saw him before. There is an angle of the character of God that we see from the edge of the wild that I think we can't see anywhere else. Does it make it easy? No. Does it make it beautiful? Without a doubt. Beautiful. Jesus, we adore you. We love your ways. We love your ways. We love your ways. We love your ways. And we submit to them this morning. And we ask that you would connect us to the truest thing, to the good, true, beautiful purpose for our lives. We thank you that you haven't just sent us spinning into earth with no plan. And so for those who don't have a handle on the plan, would you show them a glimpse? Would you show them what to do next? For those who feel disqualified from the plan, would you show them how deep is your love for them? How vast, wide, extravagant, real, overwhelming is the love of Jesus Christ. Thank you, God. Thank you that there are those worshiping around your throne today because of the gift of your Son. We ask that we would be used by you, but mostly that we would know you. We give you glory for who you are and what you do because it's always beautiful. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. If you're trying to figure out what's going on in your life, if you're struggling with something, I'm just going to say after the service, I'll just be right up here. And if you want me to pray for you, I would love to do that. I'd be very privileged to do that. Because, sometimes we can't figure out. We ask that question, God, what is the purpose in this? What's this all about? And so, I'm not saying I have answers to that question, but I think one of the great things about the church, the family of God, is that you don't have to go through it alone. You don't have to go through it alone. God has not made any of us. I know that for a fact. Your purpose is to do life with people chasing after him. And that's what we're all about here at Horizon. And I'll say one other thing. I think it's on April 10th. We're going to do a gifts, spiritual gifts, a discovery class. That actually feeds right into your purpose. And so if you want to, be part of that class, I'm just going to ask you to, hey, I want to find my gifts out. I want to know what those are because that's right in the Bible. God gives us all gifts. All of us are different, but we can help you discover those gifts. And that's part of, not everything, but it's part of your purpose. Okay? So